Hi, my name is Holly Cap, and my story, telling my story, that's something that I really had to take some time to think about, as I love stories in general. And so when I had to think about, oh, Holly, tell your own story, it took me a second, right? Because I was like, wait, okay, I'm chasing all these other stories, but what does my own look like? What does that sound like? What is it? What is it? So I grew up in a very small town. The Catholic Church in my town was the only Catholic church in the county, very tiny. Seats like 200 people max. It's a really little church. St. Elizabeth's, it's a wonderful little church. It's very old, it's been there 100 years. And I grew up in a family that both knew the power of God and the immense love of God. So I grew up in a family that understood the importance of the Catholic faith, understood that, but their story had to be their own, and mine had to be mine too. And so while I grew up with the love of Christ all around me, with fantastic parents and family whom I love dearly, I was one of those kids that was always in the church because my parents were either serving in some way or they're doing something. And so when your dad leads the fall festival, you were the kid that is running around doing whatever they want you to, right? And so I had no problems with that. I liked that. And I remember actually the first time that I think I felt God's presence. So you talk about understanding who God is. I think the first time I felt it was at my confirmation, which is, pretty solid. But my confirmation, I have a wonderful, wonderful aunt and uncle who have helped me so much on my journey in my faith, and they were my confirmation sponsors. And I just remember that day. I was kind of an awkward teenager, I don't know, teenagers today, I think they don't go through an awkward phase, but I went through one for 8 years. So I don't know what's going on. But I was kind of in that phase, I didn't have a whole lot of friends. I was in that kind of place. And I remember the day of my confirmation. It was in June, and it's Texas, and it's the beginning of June. It's hot, but it also happened that we had a massive storm. So I remember there were tornado warnings, and there was raining, and my family went ahead of us, and I was with my aunt and uncle. And sometime in between the time that they left to go ahead and my aunt and uncle and I left, the rain just got so much worse. So we were driving, and small town, we don't live far from the church, but I remember driving and you could not even see the road. It was one of those times when it rained so hard, and I just was 13 years old or whatever, and I just remember being so scared. A, because it was pouring down rain, and I couldn't see the road, and I was at the hands of my uncle's driving skills, which maybe weren't that great. Don't tell him, sorry, Uncle Mike. But also because I think, to some extent, my dad had told me, something's gonna try and stop you from doing something good. All my life, that's kind of been put into my head. There will be something that stands in your way to something good happening in your life. And all my life, that's been true. And I think that's the first time that was really truthful for me, because in my heart and looking back on it, that was a moment when I think God was saying, hey, this is not going to be easy. There's going to be suffering. There is going to be a lot of vast unknown in your life. There's going to be a lot of uncertainty. Are you going to make it to church? Probably. But your 13-year-old mind isn't so sure right now when you're in the middle of the literal storm, right? And so yes, we made it, and by the time Mass was over, it cleared up. It's a Texas summer storm. It lasts 20 minutes and it's gone. But that stayed with me for a little while. It will be hard. And so I was 13 years old, as a teenager. Fast forward a couple years, my aunt and uncle offered to take me on a pilgrimage with them when I was 15. And so 15-year-old Holly was in church a lot, but church was not her favorite place to be. So it was definitely Mass wasn't my favorite thing to go to. It's not really a lot for a lot of teenagers. And my aunt and uncle invited me to go on this trip. And me and my travel, wandering, loving heart was absolutely, I'm gonna go abroad, yes. And I was so excited for it. And when it finally got to that point, I was gone for 2 weeks. And my aunt and uncle invited me, took me. I was gone for 2 weeks. It was another one of those times when I was like, wait, this is not going to be easy. 15-year-old Holly loathed the fact that she had to go to Mass every single day on this pilgrimage. And B, I had never been away from my family for that amount of time and not by myself. I had to get to the other state that my aunt and uncle lived in on my own. And then I had to go across an ocean with them. And I loved them, I loved them dearly. But at that point, I didn't spend a lot of time with them. And so I didn't know them super well, but was still going on this trip with them. And so we went to Medjugorje, which is a small village in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And if you don't know Medjugorje, I would look it up. It is a place, just recently, 2 years ago, has been approved by the Catholic Church as a place for pilgrimage. It's a place where the Virgin Mary appears. So, and has been since 1981. So this year is the 40th anniversary of that. But she still appears there. She appears now and gives a message on the 25th of every month. But that trip, oh my goodness. I cried so much because I was this emotional 15-year-old kid whose parents sent her abroad with a track phone that had like Logan minutes and ran out of minutes, like had no cell phone, had only way of contacting my parents was having to ask my aunt, which was fine, but also terrifying because you're 15 and you don't want to ask anyone for anything ever, like heaven forbid. I had the opportunity to go to adoration there. And so if you've ever been to Medjugorje, you know that St. James Church is the one church there. It's a tiny, tiny village. And there's one church there, St. James Church. It is pretty big for such a small village. I think that church was there before the visions happened. Like, it's a pretty big church. And that's where they have adoration, and it's outside. And I understood for the first time that this really was Jesus. That I was in the presence of the being who created me. That I was in the presence of someone who loved me unconditionally. I never felt the presence of Jesus in the Eucharist that way again until sophomore year of college. Fast forward a little bit more. I was at a retreat, a Zagana retreat. If you know what awakening retreats are, you know. And I was at an awakening retreat, and they had adoration, and they had music with it. And there's something about music that stirs the soul and allows you to really enter into prayer and enter into this conversation with Jesus. And at that adoration, I felt the same way I did when I was 15. And that one was less of a, hey, I'm here and I love you and I'm not going anywhere kind of message, and more of a, hey, what are you doing kind of message. Because I wasn't too crazy, but I was in a relationship that wasn't good for my heart and wasn't going in the direction that I wanted it to go. And so that one hit me hard. And that one was like a wake-up call. It was your, hey, guess what? We're gonna stir this up a little bit, so you've got to deal with it. And at the time, right, that was another time where here we go, all the crying. But here we go, all the emotions and everything with that. And so this almost 3-year-long relationship that I had been holding on to in the months following that awakening retreat, I remember praying during adoration. I remember saying, Lord, let your will be done, but let it be gentle with me. Let me want what you want, because if I don't want this, there's no way I can have the courage to do it. If I don't want to do this, then there's no way I'll be able to end it. And miraculously, I did. And so after that, I kind of dove headfirst into studying. I dove headfirst into working, and I dove into Mass, because I said to myself, if I gave up this for my faith, I need to understand very fully would I have given up something like this for? And so I dove in. And God put wonderful people in my path. God put wonderful books in my path, wonderful experiences. There's this wonderful adoration chapel in Denison, Texas. If you're ever there, they have a 24-hour adoration chapel at St. Pat's. And it's a perpetual adoration chapel, and it's just like in a little garden. And I spent a lot of time there in college, especially like post that breakup, post everything that was going on in my heart with that. I spent a lot of time there. And it really helped me to spend time with the one whom I encountered that first time in Medjugorje. It helped me to understand that he is still there. That when he speaks to you, it's sometimes a little whisper, in the back of your head. Sometimes a little gentle nudging to do something maybe you don't want to, but is good for your heart, right? Another time that Christ made himself known to me, I walked in and the church has this chapel to Our Lady, and in the back of it, it's in the back of the church because that's how the chapels work in these big European churches. There's little chapels all around the main altar, and the one directly behind the main altar was the chapel to the Blessed Virgin, and the tabernacle was there as well. And if you know, in the Catholic Church, if you see a red candle lit, then Jesus is present in the Eucharist. And that chapel was overwhelmingly beautiful because all around the ceiling there are these hanging red candles. There are so many of them, and I walked into it, and how do I even begin to describe to you what it is to walk into a church that's older than anything you've ever seen and hear the echo of your own footsteps, and to just turn and to realize and see that you are just walking in to Jesus in the Eucharist, in the monstrance, and you're just walking into the priest lifting him during benediction. If you were me, you would have stood there and wondered, what do I do? Do I drop to my knees in this situation? Here around, all these people who I am with who are not Catholic, what do I do? And so I just kind of stood there and just stood there and just watched. And my friends stood there, watched with me. And then benediction ended. And I was just kind of reminded, hey, I'm still here. You may just kind of happen upon me sometimes, but I'm still here. And it's still not going to be easy because you're going to walk out of those doors and the world is going to be there. And the world isn't always going to be kind to you. The world isn't going to love you like I loved you. Because if you're truly in love with Christ, you are not of this world anymore. Your heart is somewhere else. And I think, especially looking back on what happened in the months to follow, right? As I was pretty shaken, as everybody else I'm sure was too, right? To walk directly after that, I came home 3 days later. I went back to class. I started my last semester in college. Super busy semester. Was finishing up, was doing all kinds of stuff, was trying to write a thesis and finish graduate school and undergrad at the same time, and I was going nuts. And 2 days into the semester, my grandfather died. And I had to hustle. And I remember presenting my undergraduate research at SMU and then immediately hopping on a plane and going to Chicago for his funeral. And I thought that was crazy. And so I came back from that, right, to a whole lot of crazy in my life. Not too long after that, the events of the coronavirus happened in my life, and as with everyone else, that shook my world just a little bit. But the one thing I could hold on to, and I don't think I would have been able to if I hadn't had the experiences in adoration that I did, the one thing that I could hold on to was that, hey, I'm still here, and this will be hard, but I'm not leaving. And it's like if we think about Fatima If we think about Mary saying to these 3 children, "Are you willing to endure the sufferings my son wishes to send you?" And we think about their empathetic yes. We have to ask ourselves that question: are you willing to endure the sufferings that he wishes to send you? Saying yes is no small feat. But if we say yes, then we understand that he'll give us the strength to endure whatever we have to, right? Look to the thing that never changes. Look to Christ, especially Jesus in the Eucharist. He's always the same. Archbishop Fulton Sheen says, "The greatest love story in the world is contained in that tiny white host." And I think I'll leave us there. If you've been thinking about going to adoration, here's your sign. You should go.